Good evening. This is the Village Board Work Session for Monday, February 23rd, 2026 at 6 p.m. We're in the Village Hall Boardroom. Megan, would you take roll call, please?
Trustee Briggs,
Here.
Trustee Benoski,
Evening.
Trustee Wojka,
Hello.
Trustee Nazarian, Mayor Domeratz.
Here. We don't have any guests with us this evening. Heidi, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
Yes. Before we begin this evening, we would like to recognize the Seneca Nation on whose ancestral territory we are gathering. The present-day village of Fairport sits on traditional Seneca land. The Seneca Nation, with the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Tuscarora, make up the sovereign Haudenosaunee Confederacy. With respect, we acknowledge the people of the Seneca Nation on whose land we now live. We honor their past, present, and future contributions to and stewardship of this land.
Thank you. We really have two items on our agenda this evening. The first one is we're going to go through some terms and talk about just the general overview of the budget and how we get to certain numbers, and some definitions of terms that we'll hear during the budget discussion. The second item is going to be an executive session, and before we head to executive session, I'll go through the budget, the upcoming meetings, which there's quite a few on the list because March is March. March is budget time. So with that said, I'm going to kick things over to Village Manager White and let you start our budget process educational review.
Thank you, Mayor. The mayor thought we were all bored and wanted to talk about this tonight, so we put it on the agenda, so I appreciate that. Thank you. So I guess tonight we'll talk a little bit about just kind of what the budget process is, what it isn't. We'll go over some basic things about what the funds are that we generally handle, and the typical things that one might see, especially the public, with respect to like what is assessed valuation, how do you determine your tax rate and your tax levy, what goes into some of these municipal budgets that kind of impact it to make it go up or down. Some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis and kind of go from there. We'll open up to some questions. This is meant to be a conversation, so please do so. A lot of you, outside of Sarah, have seen this many times before and heard a lot of this. So, or if I'm saying it in a way that you can maybe say it better or easier or cleaner, please chime in on that. Megan, that goes for you too. So, first off, the budget, like in any corporation in the world, must provide and put together a budget and have it adopted, whether it be by its board of directors or its legislative body or village board or city council, what have you. It doesn't matter if it's private or public sector work, it's required by law and you must do that. In New York State, you're required to have a balanced budget, meaning it's not where you'll see like the federal government where they pass spending bills that don't tie out to the ability to meet that projected revenue or expense load. That'd be like you guys saying, you know what, we're just, for the next 3 months, let's just go ahead and spend $20 million, and in 3 months we'll chat again and see what we want to do. I'm not really sure how you can run a company, let alone a country, that way, and this is what's happened forever in our history. I don't know how that actually works through the Congressional Budget Office and allows that to happen. The only thing they say is, hey, this if you do this, the impact will be another $2 trillion to the debt. We tell you guys, hey, this is what we're recommending or proposing. You still do what you want, but at least when you get it from us, it's balanced, meaning the revenues meet expenses, right? You know what your liabilities are and what you plan on spending and levying on the taxpayers. There's a revenue source associated with that will generally, within 95%, come to fruition, right? So that's a good thing. You'll never get an unbalanced budget presented by staff here, okay? That's what you pay us to do. It's our job to really look into those details, those operational impacts, to make recommendations about what you want to do. As I always say, though, once the budget is presented to you, it is your budget. When you adopt it, it is the village board budget, and it should reflect your spending plan, your initiatives, your priorities, and the goals that you want to achieve for at least the next fiscal year, depending on what you're looking at, okay? So what we look at here is there's four funds that you generally deal with. General fund is a common term that is used almost in every local government in the United States, and that is what makes up generally 90% of your operating budget. It's your general fund. It encompasses your general day-to-day spending plan, the things that you normally do, your personnel-related costs, all those types of things that kind of makes the day-to-day operation handle and maneuver. And the general fund will generally be comprised of what you plan on levying on, in this case, a taxpayer. Capital projects fund, we have one of those here. Maybe some places don't have that. Well, I know certain places don't do that. So we keep all that separate, right? There's your ability to operate and what that should cost on an annual basis, and then what you're talking about capital projects, so long-term investments in infrastructure, priorities, and projects. So we do that here, and the capital projects fund has a duplicate capital reserve that funds that, right? So you have this capital projects fund that kind of goes through that. The reserve, the money you put aside to meet those capital spending initiatives and needs are paid through that fund, right? So you keep that away from the general fund. The reason why do we do that? That wasn't always the case here, like a lot of places. What was happening is the general fund was comprised of purchasing vehicles, equipment, massive $1 million projects. So when you're talking about trying to stabilize a tax levy and rate to kind of keep it to comprise of that day-to-day and keep that fluctuation out, the ebb and flow, or we say the stock market effect, there's really no other way to really say it. Stock markets should go up and down, and that's a good thing. Your budget should not do this every single time the board says, hey, we would like to do X, and it's going to cost $10. But if we say I'm going to levy that $10 on the taxpayer, the taxes are going to go up 10%, right? You shouldn't be doing that. They should be fairly stable outside of those planned anomalies that you're going to put in there. Maybe that's coming with debt service or unforeseen or unmanageable personnel costs or fringes or things of that nature, right? That kind of are comprised of a general fund. We have a sewer fund here, which was implemented 8 years ago, was a new fund, and that is solely for the purposes of funding sanitary sewer-related work. Now, there's sanitary sewer and there's storm sewer. Storm sewer is truly everything that, when the rain falls, it's those gutters and manhole covers and discharges that you'll see on the side of the road, right? All that type of stuff. Sanitary is stuff that truly has to be cleaned and go to a wastewater treatment plant. So it's things like when you take a shower, all that water that goes off your body and into the drain doesn't go out to a storm sewer in the street, then fall into the Erie Canal, which most of the storm sewer in this community goes straight to the canal, like most communities, okay? It has to go somewhere, and it's all gravity-fed, meaning it's not pumped uphill. It's got to go to the lowest place it can go. Well, where is that? The canal. You got a question?
I was just going to ask you, you know what, I'll ask you about it later. It's a funding source from the state swap,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about it later.
Okay. So, the sanitary sewer fund was established to do one thing, and that it was to plan for and pay for infrastructure related to the maintaining and operating the sanitary sewer system. So when you flush your toilet, when you do your dishes, when you take a shower, all those types of things, that water is collected. It is now determined to be dirty, right, and not potable. So it goes through a collection system, and that collection system eventually goes through the sanitary sewer mains that are underneath the right-of-way on your streets, okay? And then it through gravity only, and through grade, goes through, gets out of the village of Fairport, collects into larger sanitary sewer mains that eventually flow to the county's wastewater treatment facility, okay, where that product is treated and then discharged into Lake Ontario, okay.
So this brought up something that came up during the mayor's dinner last week, And I said to Brian, after attending the dinner, thank goodness we don't have a wastewater treatment plant in the village of Fairport, because some villages do. And for example, Honeoye Falls is getting ready to have a very significant number of acreage and homes developed, and they have to build a new wastewater treatment plant. Well, they have grants for $9 million for this wastewater treatment plant, but the wastewater treatment plant will actually cost about $18 million. And their comment is, where do we get the money? And so confirming we have no wastewater treatment plants in the village of Fairport, nor do we have water systems that we have to deal with. Brockport is getting ready to get rid of their water and move over to Monroe County Water Authority. And I know the village of Fairport used to have water, but that got shifted a long time ago from us supplying water.
Yes, the village did have its
I know
own.
this is a little bit
No,
off,
it's
but
okay,
it
but-
helps to understand what other villages are challenged with as well.
We had a water main system in the village of Fairport that was operated through Fairport Electric as a utility system, right? Through the electric utility, so it did electric and water, which is somewhat common. A lot of munis have an electric and a water utility. And then I would say, God, it's getting up there now, but 15 to 20 years ago, it's not a real long time ago, the village made a determination to no longer, manage that asset. So there was a contract put in place to have Monroe County Water Authority take over those assets and distribution system of water. We used to have our own water tower, if you guys recall, that was on Summit Street, right? That was a village-owned water tower used for pressurization of the system. And when Monroe County Water Authority took over and was able to pressurize those systems and feed the village of Fairport through other avenues, that wasn't really something that was required anymore. And water towers, like anything, they're expensive. They were lead-based, painted 1,000 times. The village for a while was using it as basically a cell tower. But it got to the point where something had to be done there and needed to be mitigated. And so they sold that off, and then eventually, I'd say now, how long we've had our cell tower, but maybe 8 years ago, we looked at removing that tower, which we did, but we wanted to keep the revenue associated with those the cell tower contracts, and they're lucrative. And so we erected our own municipally owned cell tower, brought on as many contracts or leases that we could with various wireless and other data-centric organizations, and filled that up, which is over a 6-figure revenue source to our budget every single year that's non-tax related, so that's a good thing. And then we cleaned up all the area around the water tower, and you'll see it, if you go up to Summit Street now, it's where the cell tower sits. Okay.
So I'm sorry I got you off track.
No, that's okay.
You were on the sewer fund.
Yes, thank you. So anyway, that's what this, does everybody understand the difference? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to be clear, storm sewer is not part of our sewer fund.
Correct. And the way you fund a storm sewer system must be funded by New York State law through your general fund, right? If you had to, now granted, it's all the same, it's just how it's the optics of it, how it looks and how the public perceives it. The sanitary sewer fund collects, I believe, what is it, 275 per person on their bill every year, and that's just on there. If we had to fund that through the general fund, just means whatever your taxes would be higher because you're funding the sanitary sewer through there. Storm sewer is an anomaly that this board has been educated on a number of times, stating, hey, it is one of those still gray areas that the village needs to handle. It is not properly planned for or funded yet. We've made massive headway on storm sewer maintenance and understanding in this village in the last 5 years. We've done a lot of storm sewer lining. The practice of lining is taking the existing pipe that's in the ground, and instead of excavating that up, which is a very invasive process that tears up the right-of-way, people's driveways, lawns, removes trees, all these types of things, and instead of doing that and replacing in kind for 10 times the cost, we'll take, there's lining companies that will come in and take the existing line that's in the ground and line it with a, I don't know if it's a 1/4 inch lining that gets hard as rock, and basically seals all those cracks and anomalies that are in the pipe and gives it, extends its useful life expectancy, which is great.
No, we're doing that with storm sewers, but that's also what's happening with
We
sanitary
do it both with
sewers.
storm and sanitary. You know, our next massive, we do it every single year. We've done thousands and thousands and thousands of feet of this already, and it's great. And it's a proven product that works really well. We'll be doing the southeast side of the village and southeast neighborhood, Winding Brook area, Manor Hill, that type of thing in the near future. A lot of that was all put in a time when the collective thinking at that time, or lack thereof, was to use very thin galvanized sheet metal for storm sewers. Well, the ground's acidic. It's got a lot of hard elements and stuff, so that just rusts in the ground and then it collapses. Well, then how do you remove all that water and storm away from wherever you're trying to divert it to, right? So now it was a bad idea before it was even put in the ground, but it was done collectively a long way. And what was sold at the time was, it was, to say 10 cents on the dollar for what they were doing prior with a lot of clay tile and concrete piping, right, that they did back in the day. Now they've all moved to heavy plastics that work and have a very, very long longevity. And I'm sure one day they'll be like, well, gee, we're putting all this plastic in the ground and it moves through there. No different than the water that you drink is all now new stuff anyways, but in plastics, which, you know, what is that correct scenario? I think concrete works really, really well, but it's a really hard thing to, it's expensive, it's heavy, it's hard to put in the ground, all that type of thing, right? They crack, it breaks, how do you take care of it? So I'm not sure what the right answer is, but you know, they're big projects. They're not, as we say, they're not fun or sexy projects. The public doesn't see those things, and they are crazy expensive. There's nothing inexpensive about running utility, whether it be water, sanitary, storm, or electric. They're all very, very expensive commodities that you're required by law to maintain and provide for public good, and hence why villages were formed. So we do that, and then our last fund, so we've done general capital projects or capital fund, sewer fund, and then the electric fund. The electric fund is by far the largest fund from a monetary standpoint, and really from an infrastructure standpoint that we provide. We run a $45 million budget almost just for the electric side of things. We're talking, 25 plus square miles of electric distribution systems. So when we say distribution system, we're distributing electric power to almost 19,000 customers over 25 square miles. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. And it's distributed by, the power comes off the grid, right? Those massive transmission towers that you see on maybe side of a highway, whatever. And then there'll be a couple cables that come off of that and hit one of our two substations, one on Hogan and one on Turk Hill. Those two substations, power comes off the grid, comes there. Well, it's coming in at a very, very high voltage, right? So if we didn't take that power and dumb it down in a way that you can use it when you plug in your phone, it would just blow up your phone, right? So that's what's happened. So it takes it down, we bring it to a manageable rate, and then we distribute that throughout our community so that you can electrify your homes and properties to the point that you need. That's what happens in a very simplistic form, okay? And there's ways going through that where you put up transformers and other types of things to manage that power, okay, to get it to a manageable thing. So any questions on those four things? So you're going to hear throughout the budget process as you do general fund, capital fund, the sewer fund, and the electric fund. That's where we play, and those are the types of funds that we do. We also have things like we manage cemetery funds. We have two cemeteries in this village, as you're aware, so Mount Pleasant and Greenvale. Greenvale is essentially, I think, closed, isn't it, for anything? Is there a few spots? Some burials? We're not selling them. They haven't come to fruition yet, as far as. And then Mount Pleasant, which still has lots for sale or sites for sale that you can purchase, whether it be for a cremation or for direct burial of a casket. So that's still operational, but those are ones that we manage, And when I say manage, we maintain them through whether it be just the grounds itself, making sure the roads are passable, making sure the trees are managed or taken down. The trees in cemeteries fight each other drastically. They don't get along, but they're necessary for that beautification and making it a very naturistic and picturesque view. And that's what people want when these, when people come in for a burial, it's like, I want to be next to that tree, right? Well, eventually that tree's gonna have to come down because it lifts the tombstones and everything. It's just kind of the nature of it all, and that's okay. So we manage that, and through the clerk treasurer's office, you can contact that office, and you can purchase a lot and a site that you would like, and you could do it now for something, a burial that may happen in 20 years. And then once those things come to fruition, we actually manage and facilitate the burial company coming out, digging the hole, going through that process, facilitating that process on behalf of the family, closing it off. We manage the records behind that. It's been quite a task. It's still ongoing. We are in the process of mapping all our cemeteries, making sure we're documenting everything to the point that we can, digitizing all our records. This goes back over 100 years, right? So there's a lot of stuff was just kind of handwritten on some notes, and those passed along and stuff, and that's okay. That's how everything has evolved. So getting that to a point where we can manage that very quickly, understand that what we're doing, making sure that we're not missing certain sites or digging up something that we shouldn't be doing. And so records are kind of all over the place. So making sure we're getting true GIS points, understanding what we're doing, building the roads and the infrastructure, and making sure when we're selling these things, we're selling them that we can actually get to them later. And we didn't, hey, we sold these 7 sites that came to fruition. Now I can't get behind that to do the burial that we needed to do that we sold 20 years ago. So there's a lot to it. Megan and her team have been working on this for years, and it's still got a lot to go in order to get this where it needs to be, to manage it in a way that we kind of expect in 2026, right? And I think prior to that, how it was done is about as good as it could do. I mean, it was managed well, it was documented well for what they were doing and the tools and resources that we have. But like a lot of cemeteries that become under municipal control, when it comes to, let's just, for lack of a better term, the friends of X cemetery are no longer viable or no longer alive, or just the volunteerism isn't what it used to be, right? So then what happens is there is somebody has to do it. I mean, these are our loved ones and our family, and then local governments end up taking control of this. I don't know the exact date, but the village took over Mount Pleasant 15, 20 years ago? 2010? And I'm not sure what that process looked like, where I guess there was the ability to manage it from an outside perspective was no longer there, and they came to the village for assistance, and the board at that time made the decision to help facilitate that. So that's how we came to owning those cemeteries. Okay. Any questions on what we've talked about thus far? Okay. All right. Let's kind of get into some basics of the general fund, which is really a lot where you're going to be doing your work. Where's the email? Oh, yeah, I have one here. So this is what the board will see when you get your budget as a proposed budget next month, next March 18th or whatever date it is. You'll get something like this, and it'll be comprised of, your overview, your budget message, which is requirement of your budget. Budget message is essentially nothing more than a summary that you can read, hopefully, and not fall asleep, where it kind of gives you the nuts and bolts and the very, very basics of what happened during that budget, how it was comprised, what was the thought process behind it, and what are the main anomalies that we had to work with respect to revenue and expense within that budget, right? And it kind of gives you guys a snapshot of kind of what to look for and give you some of the basics, right? That's all it's supposed to do. It's your message about what's happening and why in that budget. It's generally 6 to 8 pages. Every year we try to keep it fairly simple and somewhat the same. That way you're used to understanding it and reading it in a certain way. You know what to look for, okay? It goes through that, and you get your budget process, your timeline. I think that's really important when you talk about a budget process and timeline. Let me just get to it here. Yeah. Where's the next? It is, but 1 second. I thought we had a. So the budget process is not something that we agonize over in January 1 and we deliver to you in March. The budget process is an annual process that happens. It's page 12 of your book if you're looking at the book. It starts with budgetary development, budget control, and then inaction and facilitation. But you're always working on a budget process, right? So, from a general municipal law in New York State, the budget has to be presented to the board no later than March 31st. Public hearing has to be done no later than April 15th, and a budget has to be adopted no later than May 1st, and that's for a village on our cycle, right, on our fiscal year. And we always meet those dates. That's not a problem. But when you really look at a budget, it comes down to when we start, like in the January timeframe, it's okay, let's start looking at what our spending plan is for the next year. You got to remember, we're only 5 or 6 months into the existing fiscal year. You don't even know what you're coming to yet, what anomalies might happen. Where are your revenues going to come to fruition, right? What's going to happen with sales tax? I mean, every year that I leave for a couple days in February with my family. The only text message I should be getting from work is from Megan saying, hey, this, because it comes in the same week I'm always gone, is sales tax numbers came in, this is where we're at, this is where we came off our projection, this is what we should be looking at, Brian. I get it every single year, and I look forward to it because it really tells a tale about what's going on, and it is comprised of the kind of that Christmas holiday season, which kind of makes or breaks our budget to understand when it comes to sales tax, it helps us understand what is the comfort of people and their spending power, right? What is they doing? What's the economy? Are they holding back? Are they feeling good in the markets to the point where they can go out and spend $5,000 because they don't think the market's going to tank tomorrow or they're not going to lose their job tomorrow, that type of thing. So it really gives you an insight into what's happening within the market and people's comfort with that. Unfortunately, sales tax is something that this board or I or Megan cannot control. It is completely up to the whim of discretionary spending in the market and how people feel about the general economy and where they are at in their life and what's going on for the future, because they're looking at it saying, well, gee, I'm uncomfortable where I'm going to be in 6 months or what's going to happen. Therefore, I'm going to hold back today, right? So that you start to see those patterns unfold. So you start seeing trending analysis with that. And her and I used to dive down to, okay, let's look at cars sold in the area. Big ticket items, appliance factors. What are people doing in certain discretionary markets or commodities that people buy in? If those start to slow down, it can generally tell you certain things. And you can get close. You can dive in this all day long. That you can have one hiccup, a midterm election. I mean, we had a meeting today for 4 hours, and we're going through certain things, and we're debating a proposed sales tax assumption. And I'm like, well, man, I wish we didn't have midterms because midterms make people crazy. They don't know what they're going to do. And then, you'll see the day after the midterm, it doesn't matter who's elected, what's going on, how good or bad it is. The markets just either tank or they skyrocket, right? And then the next day they go back to the opposite. So you start seeing these patterns. But you go with it. You go with it and you see what you can do. We're generally pretty close to what we're doing for the most part, but most of your revenues that the village looks at, about 50% of it is property taxes, right, or taxes that you levy, right, on the public. 25%-ish or so is by sales tax, right? So that's 75% of your revenues, and the other 25%, in a ballpark sense, are basic revenues like clerk treasurer fees and permits and this and that and the other things, that boating docking fees, things that you can almost count on. They don't amount to a lot. They don't fluctuate a lot, right? There's not a lot of movement. You can have a good year, a bad year. They're always just kind of there, right, within a point or two. So when you start looking at how you get revenues, diversification of revenue is greatly important. No different than if you're talking about like diversification of your tree canopy, right? If you go plant all oak and then there's an oak infestation that kills all the oaks, you have no trees, right? So you always want to plant, have an urban forest that's got comprised of hundreds of different varieties. Our main street is comprised of probably 60 different varieties of trees. It's intentional. It gives color, it gives palette, it gives texture, it gives diversification of beauty, but it gives a diversification of health, right? About what that looks at. Your revenue portfolio should look the same. It does with your own personal budget. Your savings accounts and your investment accounts are completely diversified. You don't all sit in bonds or mid-market accounts or international stock accounts, right? When they're good, they're good. When they're bad, you can lose it all, right? So that it's no different than any of that. This isn't rocket science by any stretch. It all correlates to just common sense in some of this. But unfortunately, when we try to talk about revenues, it's like, it's hard, but you want to look at what are other ways outside of the tax levy knob that I can turn or implement that to raise revenue, that it's based on user-based versus just, when I don't have anything else to do, everybody gets that. In this case, a very regressive tax because you're using property tax assessments for determine your ability to afford and pay your fair share of the tax bill. And that's just the way our government is based with respect to property taxes. But anyway, so what we do is we do budget development in preparation. That January to March time. March, we deliver it to the board. There's a budget deliberation, a legislative deliberation that determines, what we want to see, what we don't want to see, and what's that final budget going to look at, right? Which is a statement, as the mayor always says, of our priorities and the things that we want to do. And then that is adopted. And the moment that it's adopted, which is generally in this case is going to be sometime in April, it goes into, and then we publish the budget, get everything ready to go, and have our property taxes ready to go. So in the moment June 1 hits, Megan hits send, and it gets mailed out to your house. This is a very nice thing too. Not that property taxes should be nice, but from running a business, a company that you guys are doing, 50% of our operating cash, our revenue, comes in within 30 days of our fiscal year coming to fruition, commencing, which is great, right? So if we're talking about cash flow and those types of things, it's a very, very nice thing to have. If it's something where you didn't collect property tax for 6 months, it could be a cash flow issue where you're trying to pay for projects, especially going through the summer where you're spending a lot of money on capital investment or other types of things, and you don't have that massive revenue come in. So sometimes municipalities will have a revenue anticipation note that they have to get every single year until that property tax bills come in order to meet that spending initiative that's already put in the budget, right? But they just haven't received the money yet.
I'm going to ask you, I don't know where you had in this, we have the page of revenues open, and it starts with real property taxes. Could you start there and just say, what does real property consist of?
Just want to follow you guys.
From last year, it's, because you were just starting to go down that whole list of where we get income from. Page 46.
All right. So
Next
real
page.
property versus fake property. It's just a weird way of things that we like to say in the government world. I didn't make it up, and it is strange. Real property is property that is, it's got a parcel, a tax ID number, and it's what we tax, okay? So
Can you
that's real.
describe what is non-taxable?
Non-taxable is anything that doesn't have a tax ID or is considered maybe a 501c3. So a common thing you'll see that's non-taxable, even though they're in your community, would be maybe something like a church or a United Way, right? Or a food shelf, a school, or its school buildings, like every school building. Village Hall and all the buildings we own, they're non-tax. Any government-owned, so generally most private buildings are taxed through assessed valuation and a tax bill unless it's under some type of pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes that will generally happen. But other than that, everything is taxed. But the village, we have about a 30% of our value is not taxed, right? And that's due to it being one of those types of considerations. If you've been to NICOM, which is based out of downtown Albany, Albany has a significant funding problem. The reason it does is because Albany is the capital of New York State, and we'll relate that to in a second. You'll see how this correlates to Washington D.C., which is completely funded because it has no tax base. The entire downtown corridor of Albany is one tax-exempt property because every single entity, union, nonprofit, United Way, whatever they want to do, you have to have a presence in your downtown to be part of that Capitol building, to have lobby interest, to have lobby presence, and that's what's going on. So none of it is taxable. So they have a significantly high, how do you fund, but it has lots of traffic, still has people, still has infrastructure, still needs police, it still needs law enforcement, still needs all of that stuff, but how do you do that when the very nature of the real property, the buildings and the properties that it's serving are unable to be taxed? And that's always been a debate about how you go about doing that. There's been efforts to change some of that, or maybe even have something where I may not be tax you in the real sense of you get a tax bill based on the assessed value or the worth of your building, right? But it's something where, hey, you have so much frontage. You have 100 foot of frontage on Main Street, and you have sidewalks, and you have sanitary that's going there to feed your building. You have storm sewers going to your building. You have roads that are getting cars to your building. There's a cost to doing that, and so there will be some type of like a maintenance or construction or user fee associated with that. Some places get away with it. Sometimes they're deemed to be unconstitutional, but when you have a country like ours that has significant tax-exempt status for those types of things, you got to remember, if you have 100% of your real value, but you're only taxing 70% of it to fund 100% of the real property, the burden is you're paying yours plus 30% more, right? You're paying your share plus others to have that same benefit. I always say when you're in this business, you'll notice as in your career as you go through this and you kind of learn what's going on. You'll go places and you'll see like, this is great. You'll go through some town and there is a new United Way or maybe a Goodwill or something popping up on a main street somewhere in New York or whatever. It's not necessarily it's a bad thing, but if you look at it from the lens of how I look at it, it's like of all the places you could have put that, you put it on, you have very few places for a commercial corridor where it's like you're trying to get people to come there, spend money, and make it viable, right? And you only have so much real estate that's valuable enough where people would want to put a business. And you allowed it to have, of the 20 spaces you have, 10 of them are for these tax-exempt things, right? So you can't tax for it. It's like when you see certain things like, say, for instance, Ithaca. It's got a significant school presence there. While it's great to have that, and that school presence is the catalyst for beating up the infrastructure, right? The roads, the sidewalks. If you've been to Ithaca, you'll know what I'm talking about. But the very nature, what causes it, you can't tax to fix it, right? The schools, the plowing, the needs for that. None of the infrastructure that serves those schools, getting people to and from of that, can be taxed by Cornell or Ithaca College or any of these other places like that.
I was just going to use something that was even closer to what a village is. If you talk about the village of Brockport
Same thing.
and SUNY Brockport, it's more than 50% of the property there. And they can't tax it, right?
Nope. So it's challenging. So you people always say, well, gee, I'd rather have a college than not. But it's like all these things. Like you got to kind of, how do you measure the economic impact of having, and we're just using this as an example, just for purpose of this conversation. How do you measure the positive economic impact of having a downtown campus or something like that you can bring people to? And what does that bring to your community with respect to going to restaurants and bars and parking fees and whatever it is that school is becoming a catalyst for other economic vitality, but it's also pulling from that pot as well. When is that break-even point, and is it really a good thing to do or not? I'll tell you, there's plenty of local governments that if you were to offer a school to come there and have a downtown campus, they would tell you flat out no, right? Because there are trade-offs to that. And it's not saying that they don't want education or they don't want that, but there are unintended consequences associated with having entities like that, right? And this isn't a pull on Ithaca or anything else. I mean, I think it's great to have those colleges. It's just one of those things, they've been there for hundreds of years. I'm sure they didn't think about it 150 years ago or 200 years ago, what we're talking about today, right? And once they're there, they're there. But these are real things that today we have to deal with. And, you know, today, costs for these types of things aren't de minimis things that we used to deal with, right? Just like health insurance. Health insurance was something you just gave away. It was so cheap, right? It was like, oh, here you go. Now it is one of the major driving factors in any corporation in the world, right? And for a lot of reasons. So it's one of those things. So going back to the mayor said, let's kind of look at, if you look at page 26 of your existing budget, if anybody brought that, real property taxes are just that. And then real property taxes are made up of it. This is the revenue that you are going to levy upon our residents to balance this budget, okay? Real property taxes are only come out to, if you want to spend $10 million, and I say, listen, if you want to have a spending plan that spends $10 million, I'm going to say to you that we only have $7 million worth of these other revenues, whether it be sales tax, utilities tax, gross receipt tax, franchise taxes, clerk fees, notary fees, whatever that looks like, permits, that's only going to raise $7 million. So if you still want to spend $10 million, there's a $3 million gap, right? So you are going to levy, that becomes your real property tax levy. You're going to levy that $3 million across the assessed value of everyone that lives here, and that's what you're going to charge them because you believe the extra $3 million that you're going to levy on them for that total $10 million spending plan brings value and brings and it's worth taxing to provide the environment and the community and the local government that you are trying to do, right? And that's what you say every single year when you adopt that budget, right?
We're not adopting that budget.
I'm just saying in general, this is just conversational purposes, but that's what that is. You're levying that on the public because it meets a spending plan that you elect to spend on, okay? It is the gap between expenses we think we're going to get and the expenses we want to spend, okay?
Can you speak to, at a very high level, that sales tax number?
Sure, high level. So sales tax, which makes
Well,
up...
it doesn't, if I go
No,
down and spend
no.
$10 in
Yeah.
sales tax at what's good, I buy a big purchase and the 8% ends up being $10. Does that $10 come to the Village of
Not at
Fairport?
all, not at all. So that's a great question. So there's this, there is a belief out there that somehow, well, the village is doing really good because I always see something going on. There's always an orange cone. There's always some new business here. There's cars, people here. They're spending money. The village is doing fine. You can afford to pay for this stuff. You can afford to do whatever it is you want to do. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. Nothing. And especially in this scenario where sales tax, which makes up a quarter of your anticipated revenues that you get in a given year, every bit of goods that has an 8% sales tax component associated with it, which is what the Monroe County sales tax is, all of that goes to the county, right, for distribution, and through a contract that's with all the local governments in the county that is divvied up with a lot of factors associated with like growth, population, assessed value, all those types of things, and there's a distribution that happens with collectively the county to kind of serve all that. You know, I think the village is doing pretty well. Would we bring in, you know, in this case, what are we bringing in for sales tax? Over $2 million a year in sales tax? Probably, right? We'd probably be okay. But I can tell you prior to Fairport becoming much more elevated than it is today, you might have had a hard time living on your own merit of the commercial businesses and stuff that we had here in order to meet that sales tax goal that you had, right, for revenue needs. So it's kind of one of those things. So when you say, hey, listen, there's all these businesses coming here, I hear it all the time, and we should be doing well, and that business opened up the other day. I mean, just that alone should be bringing in $100,000 a year. It doesn't doesn't work that way. One has nothing to do with the other. And that model is not what's used everywhere. It's just what's here in Monroe County as far as how sales tax is distributed, right? And I don't see that changing anytime soon, because in order to change it, that means somebody's going to win with the new formula and somebody's going to lose with the new formula, right? So the political menagerie that would cause in the web of unintended consequences would be very, very complicated.
I can help you. The Moore and Ryan formula
Yeah.
was adopted in 1984. So
And
that's how long
still-
it's been
yeah,
around.
Yep. And I'm sure at the time that it was adopted and was discussed, there was probably something going on where somebody couldn't live and die on their own merit. And so they're like, hey, we need an equitable distribution, and I'll use that loosely too, because what's equitable to you is not equitable to everyone else. An equitable distribution of sales tax in order for the entire county to thrive together. And so this is a model that, hey, we succeed together, as we say, and we fail together, right? So when sales tax is low, everyone feels the pinch. When it's good, we all are all elevated in that regard. And of the 8% sales tax, 4% goes to the state and 4% goes to that Monroe County. And then of that 4% with the Monroe County, so that's what's distributed through this this agreement that's within the local governments. Okay. What else? So that's sales tax. I know there's more. The mayor provided. There's more distributions of how that's all worked out, but
I'm
that's
sending it to
in
everybody
a
right now.
nutshell,
The
that's where
high-level
we're at.
version of it.
We have fire protection that money that we get from the town of Perrington. So by law, towns are not permitted to have fire departments. So they can do a couple of things. They can not provide fire protection. They can have some type of third party come out on their own initiative and do a fire district, right, and take over property and say, hey, I'm going to provide fire services to this area. Fire districts have their own, I guess, EIN number. They're their own company and they're a taxing entity, right? So they can tax just like you can. They'll come up with a fire commissioners, which is similar to like a legislative body, like a village board or a town board. And they'll do that, and then they'll have their fire district that they're going to serve, and then they'll levy taxes to meet the operational budget and capital needs associated with that fire department that's going to meet the fire-related needs and responses for that area that they are protecting. In this specific instance, and I don't know how they came up with there's a fire protection district. Well, there's 4 fire protection districts at the town that makes up all the geographic areas of the town of Perrington, and they have contracted with East Rochester Fire Department, Fairport Fire Department, Bushnell's Basin Fire Department, and Egypt Fire Department to serve, okay? And they all have a geographic area that they're responsible to protect. And then there is... well, in certain cases, there's a formula in which how a payment is derived based on that area that they are serving. At least there is for the Village of Fairport. So it's comprised of what's the operational budget that's adopted, right, or what we think it's going to happen. It's based on population growth. It's based on assessed value. It's based on debt service, right, and what we're trying to do and what our operational needs are. But it comes out to be essentially, so for every dollar that we believe is required to serve the fire district, about 80 cents of that, 78 cents of that is borne. 75 cents now, it used to be 80. 75 cents of that is paid for by the town of Perrington, right? Because if you think about it, the Fairport Fire Department the Fairport itself is 1.5 square miles, right? You wouldn't need the amount of resources, right, and that we currently have in our that we currently manage and take care of and purchase if it was just serving 1.5 square miles, right? We have, 8 fire engines and the amount of volunteers that we have and the things that we're doing in 2 firehouses so that we can serve this fire protection district and meet those needs as well, right? And then the town pays us for that. In this case, the budget you're currently in right now, so this current fiscal year, it's $775,000 to cover that, to provide fire protection services to that. Okay. You know, there are some questions on how those are. Is that formula still correct today? Is Fairport receiving its fair share of revenue associated with, you know, the area that we cover, what we provide, being a true first responder to every single call on mutual aid? All the other entities don't really do that to the extent. Some of them are getting just as much, if not more, than we are for covering certain different things. So those are conversations that we will be having moving forward with the town of Parenton about, you know, what does this look like? Maybe there needs to be a review. And I'm not saying that one has to suffer for the other, but, you know, I'm sure there's a pot of money. So how's that allocated and what's that look like? You know, ours, we can account for every single penny of what we charge the town of Parenton. We don't send them an email saying, hey, by the way, send us $775,000, trust us. We go based on a formula, Excel spreadsheet. We show every cost down to the penny about what we're doing, why we're charging it, what's it for, what was the true cost, right, versus what we thought it was going to be. Everything is sent to them. Our long-term capital plans, they know in 1 year we got to purchase a fire truck. They know in 5 years this $1 million truck's coming up. Like, they know it all, and we give them that. So we want to, what we're looking for is, you know, making sure that everybody is being reviewed in that same regard and being held to a similar standard, so that when you're looking at an equitable distribution of revenue based on coverage, the ability to respond and how we respond, that it's be done in a fair way. So those are conversations we'll be having fairly soon. And we have some big purchases coming up with the fire department that if we're going to continue to have a fire protection district, you know, a ladder truck replacement, an engine replacement. We're kind of behind on one of those now. And those are things that we need to look at doing, but it's also making sure that, you know, we just don't go out and spend $1 million. By the way, the town, we didn't tell you, but instead of just giving us $776,000, I need an extra $800,000 this year because we purchased a fire truck, right? So I hope you have that sitting around, right? You want to plan, they need to be able to plan that into their operational budget too, right? I mean, they're constrained within tax caps, and good budgeting as well, right? So they want to be able to do that. And what's the best way to go about doing that? Was it, you know, are we paying cash, or are we going to bond for this, right, over the next 30 years? You know, conversations Megan and I have had is like, you know, listen, these contracts can be dropped tomorrow. And this is kind of, you know, the business side of things. If you are going to go out and bond or take a loan out for a vehicle, no different if you went to Van Bortle and bought a new car tomorrow and you did a 5-year loan on it, the bank wants to know that, hey, you have the ability to pay that over the next 5 years, right? Otherwise, what's that guarantee, right? And your collateralization and your interest rates and other types of mechanisms in your credit report all determine your capacity to do that. Well, this could be something, hey, we go out and spend $3 million on vehicles tomorrow. Oh, by the way, thanks a lot, but, you know, X fire district's going to cover your entity tomorrow. Now, would that happen? Probably no, but could it? Sure. So if we're going to go out, in my opinion, going to go out and settle a debt that is now borne by the Village of Fairport taxpayers for the next 10 years on a vehicle, I want to know that we have at least 10 years on a contract that's going to pay for that, right? Or to some degree. You know, it sounds crazy, but it's like we wouldn't be purchasing all of these or probably need to do that if we weren't having a fire protection district that we were sworn to do. So these are just some bigger picture things that I'd love to iron out, have long-term agreements, how you go about solidifying those. They're complicated. You're trying to change a structure and a handshake thing that's been going on for a long period of time. You know, the town just changed over in management and leadership, so they need some time to catch up and to learn and dive in and dig into what's going on. And we want to do that and kind of work with them. We're their partners. We want this to be a good thing. We want to continue to provide this service to the town as long as that we can. I think we do a great job at it. They're very pleased with what we do, and I don't think there's other fire districts that can do what we do and how we go about doing it. So, but we want to make sure we're making decisions. We're making them where, hey, if we're going to make decisions, the town is our partner, and they should be involved in what we're doing and how we're going about it. Okay. Appropriated fund balance is just that. So sometimes, even with all those other revenues and even you levying things on, there's still maybe $100,000 or $200,000 gap, or whatever that might be in your budget. So appropriating fund balance is nothing more than saying, you know what, I want to go on vacation. I want to spend $6,000 on vacation. I have $5,500, but man, I really want to do that excursion as well. So I'm going to take $500 out of my savings, is what you're doing, and put that toward my savings to meet that $500 budget gap or that delta, right? That's what it is. It's your savings account. It's unappropriated fund balance, unappropriated money that is not being, it has not been assigned for anything else. It has not been earmarked for anything else. It's just kind of sitting there. Your rainy day fund is your savings, for lack of a better term for this conversation, okay? Pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. So all real property gets assigned an assessed value, and that assessed value gets a tax bill based on whatever the rate is. So, and we're going to go through all that. In certain instances, when you don't get a normal tax bill from the clerk treasurer's office saying, hey, you owe me $1,200 or whatever the case may be, it's a payment in lieu of taxes. So what will happen is there's only certain governing entities by law that can formulate, facilitate, and implement a pilot. And it has to be through like an OSED like we have here. OSED is the Fairport Office of Community and Economic Development, and they run a local development corporation, an urban renewal agency, IDA,
Industrial development.
yeah, Industrial Development Authority, and there's Section 8 as well. So the local development corporations are allowed by law as legal entities and arms of the state to negotiate a tax, as a settlement, a tax arrangement that is different from what you guys implement via this budget. Okay. In this case, Fairport has their own, and the OSED, Office of Community Development, is a body that is appointed by you to make those decisions and to hopefully foster the intent and the desires of the greater community, right? It is its own agency, but you guys do appoint them. So they shouldn't be where, gee, they're just talking heads for you, and then you give them direction and you're always telling them what they should or should not vote on. That's not the intent. However, good relationships should be, well, the reason we have our own is because instead of having COMEDA with the county, right, the County of Monroe Independent Development Authority, which is COMEDA, right, they do it for the entire county. So if you don't have theirs, everything goes there where developers are looking for some type of pilot arrangement. And it could be more than just pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. You know, IDAs and LDCs have the ability to abate sales tax on new development. So say, for instance, I'm going to build a new building across the street. It's an old derelict building, and nothing's been happening for 20 years, and I'm going to put $5 million into it, right? General consensus sometimes, just for math here, it would be, well, of the $5 million, I'm going to spend $2.5 million in materials, and then the other $2.5 million is going to be based on labor and stuff. So now I have $2.5 million that I'm spending on goods, just say at Home Depot, and all that's being charged 8%. Well, gee, I'd rather not spend that 8%. I'd rather put it into the building or my pocket. So what we do is they go and they apply to have that mitigated or abated. So that 8%, so you're saving 8% on all those goods. That's a lot of money, 8% on $2.5 million, or whatever the development costs are. You can also have things, these are general ones, mortgage tax abatement. Mortgage tax is anytime you buy real property and you finance that real property, not cash. So say you bought some for $1 million. You put $500,000 in cash down, and the other $500,000 you borrowed from Chase Bank, right? That borrowing, once you trigger borrowing for real property, it institutes a 1% mortgage tax, right? It is just another taxing car, right, vehicle opportunity. And that 1% goes directly as a one-time fee only to the local government or jurisdiction that it's in this case, the Village of Fairport. That's why I don't like to see those abated, because those are few times that we actually get to have that one-time revenue. And when they're abated, you don't get it, right? We don't build them in our operating budget because they don't materialize next year, right? So unless you have other mortgage taxes that don't come to next year, say you got $30,000 this year in mortgage tax, mortgage recording fees. and that's what they are. And next year you didn't get them, now you have a $30,000 budget hole the next year, right? So you want to make sure that, we plan for what we think we're going to get on average. If we get 10 grand more this year or 10 grand next year, we always keep that somewhat constant, right? Because it's going to fluctuate. So those get abated as well, and those all help in the realm of when developers or other people want to invest in a community, these sometimes incentivize developers to say, hey, I'll choose Fairport over maybe another community because they have incentivization opportunities to abate some maybe sales tax or mortgage tax or put us in a pilot. Pilots generally on just a basic pilot, and they're necessary sometimes. I mean, when things don't organically happen in a community, it's great having OSED that can come in and have some different tools besides just, hey, come here, it's great, we'll treat you good, we'll build some sidewalks. Sometimes you need some encouragement. And, you can think about the cannery. The cannery sat there for 60 years growing weeds, right, and rusting away, and nothing was going on. And then finally, as Fairport became popular, and there was a lot of going on, people started taking a chance, but it's still a chance, right? So in order to do that, certain abatements and incentives were provided to the development of that property in an effort to see it come to what it is today.
I'm going to add something as an example. When you were talking about the sales tax abatement, the cannery had sales tax abatement for all the purchases that they made as they were building it. Can you speak a little bit to how that impacts our real property that we can, so like the cannery is on a pilot,
So
just in a
I'm going to give you a very,
rough
very
idea.
basal what a pilot contract may look like. So instead of saying, hey, listen, we have a $10 million property and our tax rate here is, say, 7%, right? So we would take that 7% and levy that on to that property every year. So they would pay, what, $70,000 or whatever in taxes. Well, what would happen is, okay, if it's $10 million, and that's, say they bought it for $1 million, right, because it's derelict, and they're going to put $9 million into it, so now it's worth $10 million. What they're saying is, an incentive to kind of develop that and get this up and going, because starting a new business is challenging, and if you levy this very high tax on us, it makes a project like this maybe unsustainable, or it may set it for failure because the cost that they're going to have to charge to the lessees within a complex like that become too high because they got to make up for those taxes that are happening every year. So they want to get it established and sustained. As those prices go up, it's established and can generally handle those things and absorb those costs. So in this case, instead of being, they'll do like a 10-year pilot, and now it's worth $10 million once it's built. They'll say for the first 5 years, it's only going to be taxed at that initial $1 million that it was assessed at pre-development, okay? And then on the 6th year, that'll go up 20%, right? And then on the 7th year, it'll go up to 40% of the real assessed value. 8th year, 60%, 9th year, 80%, and the full value. So it'll be taxed at its full value on the 10-year mark versus on the 1-year mark. And that provides that incentive and that grace and that leeway for that commodity or that business to get established before these type of rates come in. And that's the theory behind it. Whether it works or not, who knows? But nevertheless, that's the formula that we have supposed to. And those are that's a very generic one and kind of somewhat of a common one. But those can be arranged and be custom to whatever in this case, the local development corporation and the entity believe it takes in order to do that. Sometimes projects, no matter what you do and how you abate it, just really don't make sense, right? If certain projects can only work unless they're abated to the fullest extent of the law, maybe it's just not a good, viable proposal or project, right? And maybe sometimes that's just what it takes to kind of get these things going. I mean, what would the village be today if the cannery was still like that, right? And there's a big part of that cannery, everything west of essentially Iron Smoke, that still hasn't been developed today, as you guys are aware, right? There's 300,000 square feet of viable space, 300,000 that is yet to be developed. And we're hopeful that, and I firmly believe that this community is ready and ripe to facilitate a development process through there. That project and the development of that project is incorporating the DRI application that was submitted by this board. hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we hear something. And that would be great, right? To have something like that finally really develop, because right now it's just sitting there and it's unfortunate, right? And that's, that's a huge parcel, historic parcel that can be utilized for something really, really nice. So, and it's already seen that it can be done. You just got to get the right partners and the right people together. But the community itself there's demand for it, and whether they put businesses in there or housing, I think those will be sold at the conceptual drawing stage. When you see the watercolors, when they come in and say, "Gee, Village Board, if you like this, look what it could look like," I think it'll sell on the watercolor. It really will. So.
I'm going to give you a chance to take a breath and get a drink of water. Does anybody have any questions about what we've covered so far with the list of revenues?
We're really deep diving here more than I thought we would, but I mean, you can tell us what you're interested in or not. But go ahead, please.
Where does things like CHIPS go and AIM money? Is that in the fees or?
Sure, good question. So AIM is aid and incentives to municipalities. AIM, that is state revenue that
It's right here.
it's not a gift because it's state taxes that were taken from you. The state
Someplace in the list,
takes them,
but it's this pink.
repackages them this thing called AIM, and then gives you back your money. Sorry, it's a trigger for me. It's insane. It's like this gift that we're doing for you. No, you taxed it and you gave it back. That's what AIM is. And so we get an AIM payment every single year from New York State. It hasn't changed in a long time. It's $140,000. The state gave us about another $9,000 that's associated with AIM a couple of years ago, and I think this year is like another $20,000 or so that they're giving us.
Maybe.
Allegedly, it hasn't been.
Maybe.
It's in the proposed budget. It's in our proposed budget as well, so it better materialize. Or I'm going to send you guys to Albany to do some lobbying.
So the other part of the question is, where does CHIPS fall in
Yep.
this list of
And then
revenues?
CHIPS is Consolidated Highway Infrastructure Program grants or something. So anyway, it's money that comes from the state that local governments are supposed to utilize for repair of infrastructure like roads, sidewalks, those types of things, to do that kind of work. So CHIPS funding is built into our capital plan, right? So in our capital plan, you'll see, all our capital projects and things that we're going to do. Then we'll look at resources or funding source about where it's going to come from. And we have that allocation that we get every single year built into that. So in our capital plan, it's not just, hey, we'd like to do this work. It's like, if we plan on doing this work, this is the cost, but it's balanced as well. This is how we're going to fund it, whether it be through cash, through bonds, through grants, through CHIPS funding, through CDBG grants, whatever the case may be. And we track it all through there. And we now are in a practice of every quarter submitting for CHIPS reimbursements because it's cash flow at this point, right? And we're doing it, and they've been doing it. Jason and Public Works and the clerk treasurer's office been doing an amazing job keeping up with that and keeping that money in. And we've been spending a lot of money on infrastructure the last couple of years. Millions of dollars. That's CHIPS applicable, and we've been putting in for that, and it's really helped us out doing the things that we would be able to do.
So we wouldn't see that CHIPS as a category under the general fund. You'd see that under individual projects in the capital plan. Whereas AIM shows up under the general fund.
Does that make sense, Tracy, or not really? Okay.
Any other questions?
But those revenues that you see, without getting all, those are just some of the major revenues that we do, and then we have that other revenue category for $175,000. That's not, that's just your basic stuff that kind of comes through. We can every line item for every dollar that you guys get is accounted for and shown in your line item budget that's in this book. Sarah will go through all this, I told you on Wednesday, and what you have in your budget. So there's nothing that we just come up with, we should get this. All of it is projected about where we've been doing for the historical value of that revenue source, where we believe we'll be at the end of the year, which totally based on, you use it for a basis, an analysis of what you believe next year will bring, right? It's not just, we budgeted last year, but it didn't really materialize, but heck with it, we'll go with it again. We don't do that either. We finalized most of that today, right? I'm hopeful that we're in a good spot with our budget where we're looking at.
No previews.
No previews right now, anyway. So that's where we're at with big revenues. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So, do you want to talk? So let's go to this form. This to me is what tells the story about what's going on here and what you guys are doing. And if there's anything you need to understand in this budget and how you need to be able to verbalize this to the public, your constituency, and explain what's going on, it's this sheet, right? It is simple in nature, but it kind of tells a story about what you're up to. So your total budget overview, and this is and this is not next year, this is your current year budget, all right? So you'll see adopted 25-26 as one of your columns. Let's live there. So first, your total taxable assessed valuation, right? So it's important to note taxable assessed valuation. Our full assessed valuation for all the village is what? I don't remember the number is, but maybe it's 500 million. I don't know what it is. Do you have it? I know it's in there. I just don't have it. Say it's 500 million. Of that, 424 million is, how much is it? 684. So we have $684 million worth of value, of real property value within the confines and corporation limits of what you manage and serve, right, as a legislative body. Of that, 424 million is taxable. Seems like a big difference, but what's this building worth? What's a school complex that takes up 25 acres off of Hulbert worth, right? And 4 other schools, right? All those other types of things that you think about. They add up to be a lot. What's an electric building on Lithbridge Lane East worth? Right? They actually pay, though. So, and that's the other thing, and the equalization rate. So right now, this is hard to get into right now, but equalization means that everyone is being assessed at their fair market value of what their property is worth. All of you, unless you live in a hole right now, know that the town of Barrington is preparing the public to go through a brand new reassessment revaluation process, which means they're going to go out and affirm and change and equalize and make sure that if your house is worth $100,000, that you're being assessed at $100,000 and you're paying your fair share of taxes, for better or for worse. Some will go up, some will go down. Our equalization right now, I don't know, but last year was like close to 60%. I'm not sure where it's at today. It may be probably a little lower than that, but we're in that ballpark. So you're talking about the majority of residential properties being assessed at, or equalization being at 60% of its full assessed value. It doesn't mean that they're getting less money. It just means that the rate is higher in order to meet that 40% delta that's not being accounted for. So they're going to go through that process now. The town has, I think, physically went out and measured. I know last summer they would sit in their cars and go look at all the properties with their boards and those types of things. So when they go about looking at that, they look at a number of factors. A, what are homes selling for right now, right? You may have bought your house for $200,000 10 years ago, but if you were to sell it today, it's $350,000 or $400,000, right? So it's not an anomaly of your house doing that. Just because you sell your house for $400,000 doesn't mean that the assessed value is $400,000. Now, if every other house in your general area that's very similar to your homes, with the structure of the bones, the same date, same square footage, is all selling for $400,000 with you, yes, then everybody starts to kind of go up with that, right? You never want to be the lowest property on a street or the highest, right? You want to be somewhere in that middle. If you're the lowest and everything's going up high, your house is going to be by default valued at a much greater rate. That can be two things. It could be A, it's nice for when you sell it, but B, you're artificially paying higher taxes until you sell it, right? So there's some pros and cons to all that. So again, of that $684 million that Megan talked about as full assessed value, $424 million of that is taxable. All the other stuff is untaxable, meaning it is either a nonprofit status, government entity, educational entity, or some other thing where it's not taxed. It also could be a pilot, right? Because
That's what I was going to ask. Could it be a pilot?
Yeah, it's not being taxed. It's being taxed by a pilot. So it takes it off the assessment roll and goes into its own revenue formula. Okay? The levy. So of the 424, that's $424 million of assessed value that you guys are able to levy taxes on. Does everybody understand that? The levy, the next number that you see there at 3,570,000. The levy is the amount of money you chose to charge and levy upon the taxpayers. So if you look down there, general fund budget, we had a budget last year, adopted budget of $7,673,000. Does everybody see that? Right? You chose to spend that much money in order to meet the spending plan and the services we provide, $7,673,000. Well, of that, you had roughly whatever it is, $4 million worth of other revenue, but you needed the other $3.57 million, right? That was the gap between other revenues and what you wanted to spend. So you fill that up and say, well, that's the delta, so that's what I'm going to tax and levy upon everybody to meet this spending plan that you did. So $3.5 million. Okay, and then last year, as you can see, it went up. The levy, the amount of money raised by taxes alone, went up 10.23%. Right? Everybody see that? Okay. The rate. So people talk about the rate all the time. Don't do it. I'm telling you, don't do it. It means absolutely nothing. People say, well, gee, I live in Henrietta and my tax rate's $2.20. I live in Geneva and my tax rate's $22. Oh my God, it's so expensive to live there. No. If you live in Geneva and your tax rate's $18 and you live here and your tax rate is $7, I can probably tell you they're probably paying almost the same. It just depends on what's going on. It's another apples to apples. You don't know what they're charging, what services they have, what's built into that budget. But I can tell you the average assessed value single-family home in Geneva may be $70,000, right? The average single-family home assessed value here may be $210,000, right? Which is 3 times greater than there, right? So our tax rate, if everything was equal the same, would be 3 times less here, and theirs would be 3 times more. It still gives you, the math still gives you the same thing, okay? The tax rate is nothing more than a mechanism to meet the difference between assessed valuation and the amount of money you're going to raise through taxes. That's it. So tax rate is that. It is taking the total assessed valuation, in this case $424 million, and divided it out by the levy. And that's how you get that. Take that, whatever that number is, and times it by 1,000. So what we do is when we say a tax rate, in this case your tax rate is $8.40, almost 41 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation. So if you have a $100,000 home and your tax rate is $8.40, it means for every $100,000 of value of your home, so if you have a $200,000 house or $100,000, that's $840. If you have a $200,000 house, it's $1,680, right? It's simple math. Okay. So when you get all that, you look at, okay, well, in this case, last year, the median taxable assessed value for a single-family home in this community, and this is, again, does it make sense? No, but the town has, the equalization rate's down, the town hasn't reassessed everything, so it's, as of on the books of last year, $180,000, right? $180,500, okay? So then you say the average tax bill is $1,517, right? Because you're taking the the $8.40, that's how you get your average tax bill, your $8.40, which is your tax rate, right? Times the $180,000 that your house is worth, that's how you get the $1,500, the $1,517. Does that make sense? Tracy, does that make sense or not really? Okay. That's how you get the average tax bill. It's the average one. There's people that have higher priced homes and lower priced homes. But if everybody's home on average was worth $180,000, that's what your average tax bill would be, $1,517.
There's something different in what you're saying. So this is a median taxable assessed. So median means that's where the most houses in this community cost.
Yep.
Versus an average,
Yep.
which is take them all, throw them in a pot,
Yep.
and divide them by
Yeah.
how many there are. So that's, I think a lot of people get confused when you say median versus average.
So we do the median, yeah.
Yeah.
We can do the average, but it does skew the results more so than the median.
So while it's an average tax bill, it's based on
Correct.
the median taxable assessed value for a
Correct.
single-family home.
Okay.
So Brian,
And so that increase last year went up, your tax bill went up $12.42. So, which is $167 more in your tax bill. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say for folks who are apprehensive that a reassessment is coming through, and somebody wants to just say, why are we even doing this? That's going to keep my...
Not doing it. Town of Barrington's doing it first.
Well, right, but in other words, why, in general, though, is the community pursuing this? You know, why can't we just keep it even?
You can't because it's not equitable. And every year that you continue to not have an equalization rate at exactly 100%, which it always should be at, always, it means that certain entities, corridors, properties, or, zoning parcels or areas are paying more than others, right? There's somebody subsidizing something because you can't have an equalization rate of 60%. And you'll generally see sometimes, like in communities that don't do it for a while, you'll find that the commercial corridor, for political reasons, nobody wanted to do reassessments, right? So the residential properties continue to have an equalization rate that continues to fall, and it never gets adjusted because there has to be new business coming in all the time. They're paying a higher rate, which continues to subsidize the residential taxpayer. The intent of that is to keep that where everybody's paying their fair share based on true and, to the best point, a formula that the assessed value is being assessed on everybody, right? And is being formulated on everybody, and that's the point of it. I remember when I got into this business, I remember in 2004 going to a community, and I think in 2005 or 6, we were in a community that hasn't been probably revalued or reassessed in 20 or 30 years. When I say equalization rates of 40 and 50%, that was there. We had people paying, $100 for a tax bill because the commercial corridor and other entities were significantly subsidizing all of that. But as you can see, and the town is dealing with it too, it's a significant educational campaign. It's very challenging. They've put out more stuff than whatever, and they're still getting so much heat. It doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. It's a very difficult thing to understand. And what people think is, and this is the common thing, and all of you can probably attest to this at some point before you got on the board, and you know what you know today, that if they come out and they reassess my home and my assessment goes up, I'm going to pay more in taxes. Tell me all of you didn't think that. All of you thought that. Right? All of you did, including myself, right? Before you learn about the process. It's not true at all. One has nothing to do with the other as well. Okay?
Well, and if I understand what you're saying too, is if you don't do that, you're running a risk of hurting your local economy at the same time.
Most certainly. You can start driving away business or driving a residential sector. It depends on which one is subsidizing the other. So the whole point is everyone's paying their fair share, right? And whatever that factor was for formulating what that fair share was. But at least it was that factor and that formula was implemented evenly in the same way, whether it be skewed or not, across the board. And that's the intent of it. Okay. The state used to have a very, very aggressive equalization strategy where every 3 years you had to do a full reassessment of a community. The state used to pay municipalities by the parcel in order to stay in compliance with 100%. That program ended in the 2010s, 15 timeframe, but it was so bad for so long, especially in a lot of these rural communities that just never touched this type of thing. There's not a lot of activities. They're not building new homes. They're not new people moving these areas. Nobody wanted to touch it, and I understand why, right? It's a complicated thing, and it creates a lot of anxiety and angst, naturally so.
Yeah, I just think it's good to have that. We're getting into the details, but yeah, why? What happens if we don't? Right. So that's
the inequity continues to be exacerbated. That's the answer.
We end up hurting ourselves.
Yeah, that's the answer.
It's also, I think, when you buy a house, doesn't your tax bill go on what you paid for it?
Not always. No. If you say you went out and say when you bought your house was $180,000. No, let me rephrase that. Say your home was assessed at $180,000, and then you went out and spent $220,000 on that home to buy it, right? 2 years later or whatever, or whenever that was. Your next tax bill won't always be at $220,000. right? Because it's not just looking at your home, because you could be in an anomaly home, right? You just updated your kitchen and your, whatever. They're looking at, what is everything else selling at, right? What is the market bearing? Is this an anomaly? All those types of things. So yeah, you could have paid 30 grand more than what the assessed value was of your home, right, on the books. And remember, assessed value and appraised value is two different things too. Very different things. Appraised value looks at true market value at that time. Okay?
Somebody willing to pay.
That's it. Yeah. And that's a good point. Trustee Banowski brought this up. Your house isn't worth anything. Your house is only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. You could have spent $1 million to build your home, but if you want to sell it and there's only 3 people willing to give you $50, that's what your house is worth, right? And the people always think, well, I put in 400 grand into this house and now I bought it for 800 and it should be 1.2. No, right? So you got to make smart choices when you look at investments in your home. But your house is truly only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. No different commodities or anything like gold and silver, it goes up all the time. If somebody quits buying gold because we don't want to look at those types of vanity-driven things aren't something that's in pop culture in this decade or for this generation, so they stop buying it, what happens to the price of gold? Goes to zero almost, right? That's what happens with it, right? If there's another metal that comes out there that's better for continuity connections and cell phones and other type of electronics, which gold plating is very much needed for that electrolysis standpoint, but if there's another metal that's out there cheaper, what happens to the price of gold? Not $3,000 an ounce like it is today. It's $3,500 an ounce. It's massive. It's never been higher in its life in the history of that commodity. It could be $10 because there's something else out there. So it's only what somebody's willing to pay for it. Wake up, everybody. No sleeping. All right. So again, back on that total budget overview page. So the general fund budget is that. That is the expense load of the budget you're doing. In this case, it is your budget because you have, if your general fund budget is $7,673,413, we've stated in this budget proposal that there is $7,673,413 worth of revenue as well, right? It doesn't mean that but it's comprised of sales tax, real property taxes, all these other things. The next line you see on here is really important. It's that appropriated fund balance line. Appropriated fund balance is just that. If we didn't appropriate in this current, well, we didn't do anything. We did zero. But say we had $200,000 there, and we didn't appropriate that $200,000. It means your tax levy would have to go up $200,000 in order to meet that budget gap. Okay, what you want to make sure is so appropriate fund balance isn't a bad thing. Generally, a lot of people look at it as, oh, hey, if you're structured, how do I always say this? If your structured expenses, right, things that are structured that are constants in your budget, if your structured expenses do not meet or exceed your anticipated revenue, things that you can count on a daily basis, you have a budget that's unsustainable, right? If I'm spending $100 a week, but you only pay me $80 a week, I have structured expenses that meet my anticipated revenue. So it's an unbalanced budget and it's an unsustainable practice and it's bad budgeting and financial management, right? How we do this is going to make my budget presentation so easy if you guys already know this. But the appropriated fund balance is just that. We're saying, hey, listen, the gap from all that is still 200 grand. We don't want to raise taxes anymore to raise that $200,000 for appropriate fund balance or extra savings to do that. We only do that when we have enough unappropriated fund balance where if we appropriate that, we're still in a safe zone. The general rule from a financial perspective is to have whatever your expense load is. So in this case, it's $7.6 million. You want to have 20 to 30% of whatever that expense load is, right? Of whatever 20 to 30% of that is, you want to have that in your savings at any given time. So in this case, 10% of that would have been $760,000, so 3 times of that. So you want to have maybe $2.3 million in savings that's not used for anything else in order to have a budget like this. And they do that so you have rainy day funds. If something doesn't happen, if certain revenues don't materialize, you have the ability to meet that COVID. You have the ability to meet that liability that you've incorporated into your budget, right? And to be able to pay payroll and other types of things. And that's common, whether it's public or private sector organizations, you need to have something like that. You'll see last year we didn't appropriate any fund balance. Appropriating fund balance is if people are doing it every single year and then spending it. So like if we appropriate 200 grand worth of fund balance this year to meet this budget, and then when the budget year was over, we had to spend that $200,000 in order to meet that expense load, like we didn't have any savings throughout the year, whatever. We're saying basically there's a $200,000 hole that is not being met in this budget, right? So we either need two things. We need to find additional 200 grand of revenue to meet that budget gap. We need to cut 200 grand worth of expenses, right? Or you can keep appropriating fund balance, but eventually your savings runs out, right? What replenishes fund balance? It's when you raise revenue and you don't spend it all, it falls to fund balance. It falls or it gets put into your piggy bank.
To use your same example, you instead of earning $80 a week or 800, I don't remember if you used 800 or 80. Instead, you're earning $110 a week and your bills are 100. So now at the end of every week, you've got that extra $10 that's falling aside. So you're meeting your expenses, but that extra money that you didn't use at the end of a year is sitting there and you're like, oh, well, that's my fund balance.
Yeah, if it's not appropriated or expended or earmarked for some other purpose, we put it in. It just sits in a bank for unappropriated fund balance until it's appropriated by this board or we find another use for it, which there always is. Like you can always throw money into capital. You can always do
I'm
something.
going to throw it in my car fund
Whatever you
to
wanna
save
do.
for a car in the future.
And we've always had a very healthy, doesn't mean that we're overtaxing. We've always had a healthy fund balance, but it's important that you do that. You can sit here and say, well, gee, we have 30% of our structured expenses in fund balance, right? We have that $2.5 million there. Shouldn't we be giving that back to the community, Brian? Shouldn't we give the people today a tax break because we're sitting on this $3 million and it's just sitting there and it's sitting there and never goes away?
Sure, shooting that year
I'm
is the
gonna-
year a major main goes.
I'm going to tell you no. I know that's the politically correct thing to do, but the fact is no one should operate on a margin where you have no ability to meet an unknown liability, right? Or meet a contingency that you didn't plan for, right? Would you operate your household and have absolutely no money in savings or anything else? So quite frankly, anything you spend what you take in your paycheck and you don't plan for that roof or that disaster or whatever may come, you can't operate that way. You may be able to do that in a very simple form in your own home. You got 4 people in an 1,800 square foot house running a multi-million-dollar company with 4 funds that you're responsible for 2,400 households and 5,500 residents. You should not gamble with infrastructure or quality of life with people like that. You have a responsibility not to do that, I will tell you. It's very serious about what you weren't elected just because you were popular. When you really look at the responsibility of why you were elected and what you were doing, you have a very, very important job. You were given the right and the responsibility to ensure people's basic living standards, their health, their quality of life, how they view their community. The value of their home is solely responsible in how you manage these assets in the community around it, which dictates their values. All those types of things, right? Placemaking. So it's a big, big thing. And it's no different if you're on the planning board or zoning board. You have a responsibility not just to review a site plan application. You have a responsibility of maintaining and promoting a viable community, right? And making sure that projects that come through, meet the general code and the standard in which this village board adopted, right? They don't do what they want. They only operate on the code that you gave them, right? That's where they operate in the confines of. And if you don't like how decisions are being made, change the code, right? But that's how it works. It's not, well, I don't really like that color. And if there are decisions making like that, then you need to tighten up the code, right? Because that's what really should be happening. They're facilitating applications within the confines of the constraints that you give them, or lack thereof. Okay.
I think I was good. Unless you wanted to cover briefly what the tax cap is. That was the only other thing I had on the list. if you'd rather wait until a future meeting, but you could get a brief overview out of the way right now.
Yeah. So.
No formulas, please.
Okay, so, I mean, high level is, New York State has placed a 2% tax cap on the tax levy, not on the tax rate, so the amount that you raise by taxes. There's a lot more that goes into that. There's some tax-based growth factors. You know, if your tax base grows, your starting number, you have to inflate that. Sometimes they look at retirement. You know, we talk about, oh, you want us to stay within 2% of our levy, but then New York State sends you a retirement bill that exceeds that. They'll give you some exclusions to help you ease that burden, so that goes into the tax cap. So long story short, it's not always 2%. So we have to do a calculation to see what this 2% tax cap levy is. Where the 2% comes from is you can raise taxes the lesser of 2% or inflation. So that's where the 2% comes from.
So if inflation was 5% last year, would you raise it 2%, have to stay under the tax cap? You would have to still stay under 2% because that was the lesser of the two.
Yes, yep.
But the intent behind this in 2000, go ahead.
No, that,
Say, tell the story. I mean, the intent behind this.
It was passed in 2011?
The intent behind what we call the 2% tax cap legislation was to do that. It's not a secret that New York State is first or second in this country for the highest property taxes in the country. And it's all based on spending within the state, right? And how it's make up and so forth. So the intent was to say, well, gee, it's not what the state's doing within creating an environment in which it's very high tax and very expensive. You guys as local legislators and legislative bodies need to do better and stop spending like drunken sailors, and you need to control yourself. So I am going to impose upon you legislation that you can't spend more than 2% unless the collective or the majority of the legislative body overrides and passes legislation or local law every year to override that tax cap, because now you're saying, I'm willing to do it or I may need to do it, and you'll be held accountable for that. That's why it's put there. Unfortunately, where did 2% come from? How is that a manageable standard, right? Who said that was going to be? And does that really make sense in the real world, right? That was just, hey, it just sounded good in the Capitol building of Albany, and that's where they agreed to settle on. That's what happened, and the 2% came out of that number. Why not 3? Why not 4? Do any of your homes continue to stay only on 2% in a given year? No. There's not a bill you own that you currently pay today that is only 2% higher than it was last year. Name your insurance bill, your car note bill, your interest rates, your Netflix bill. I don't care what you do. I will almost challenge you. I got my refuse bill. It goes up 3% a quarter, I think. You gave me one from last month, was $39, and it went up to $41 on waste management the next quarter. It's not even in the fiscal year, it's just the next quarter. So it's challenging, but it does that. But the intent is to make you think that, hey, people are watching. We want to make sure that you're doing it, and if you're going to do it, you're consciously making that decision to do it. It's impossible to live in those confines. We did this for a long time, trying to stay within that. You cut away every part of discretionary spending that you may have in a given budget, but like a budget that we're looking at maybe for this year, I can tell you over 8%, an 8% increase would be required just to handle personnel-related costs without anything else in this budget. You would have to raise tax just to meet that demand. It's not saying when you're getting it, so don't read into it, but I'm just telling you that's a true statement, 8.63%. That's the number, because I was built in my head this afternoon with it. How do you manage that? And how do you say, well, how do I meet those objectives? And remember, next year that goes up again, so it compounds on itself, but I'm only living within 2%. So even if you wanted to do it, you'd have to constantly keep eroding at the service level that you provide, right? Or find additional revenue that's not taxes, right? So make up things. Charge for this, charge for parking, charge for watching birds and whatever that might look like. There's only other ways. You find alternate sources of revenue outside the tax levy, right? Or you reduce expenses, aka cut services. That's it. It's the only thing that you can do. Or when you raise taxes, you're saying, listen, we value the services that we provide at the level that we provide them. We believe that we're doing the most efficient and effective way possible. So therefore, we're willing to tax X in order to keep the standard in which that we currently do. Right? Those are the decisions you make when you adopt a budget.
So I get questions like, well, why are you adopting this local law number 1? And something that we already talked about this evening is we know roughly right what AIM funding will be. But what if the New York State legislature and the governor don't finish their taxes or don't finish their budget on time, which, by the way, they haven't done for many years? And there's that other $29,000 that we talked about building into our budget. And then someday, suddenly on April 2nd, the governor says, there's a hole, we can't give you that money. And now you've already built your budget with that, and they are pulling it back right before you're supposed to adopt your budget. Or maybe they wait until April 20th to finally finalize their budget, and they say, oh, there was a hole. So we're taking back that money that we promised you that you already did your budget on. That's just one example.
We wouldn't do it, but because it's 20, should it not materialize, we have other revenue sources, unappropriated fund balance that we can meet that for this year, right? If there's 200 grand and it was iffy like that, we would never do it. We've made those decisions before, where it's too big of a liability, should it not materialize. But you were explaining tax cap, sorry. Go ahead.
Is there anything else to explain?
So that's really what it is, and there's a bunch of exclusions that make up for, tax base, tax growth. If retirement comes in too high, they give you a break and say, okay, gee. So this case, in this year, 2% is not 2%. We're allowed to tax, I think, 2.36% and still stay within the 2% tax gap, right? There's times when you can tax 5% and still say that you are within the 2% tax cap, based on certain factors and exclusions. Pilots are in there as well. So it's their formula, but they try to make it to where, they understand that certain times you just can't live within that, so they give you some leeway.
So
But this year, like right now, of your full general fund budget, the budget coming up, in order to stay within the tax cap, means you can only raise the tax levy, the amount of money raised by tax alone, by $89,000. One line item in the budget exceeds that by 20 grand. One line item. You have 3,000 line items. It's you can't do it.
So I'm going to put a call out. Anybody have any last questions?
Not on the explanation of our budget process review educational programming tonight. I'm good for right now.
And I'm assuming we can't play the lottery as a village?
Probably not actually. That's a good question.
I'm good, I don't have any questions. Thank you for.
If we
taking
were
the
only
time.
funded by the lottery.
If only.
If only. If only. Anything over here?
Nope, no questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I know it's like really dry and but at least you've heard the terms before we open the budget books again next month. So you can go, oh yeah, that was that discussion that we had there. All right, refresh my memory. What was the general fund again? I know you covered it once, but at least it gives an initial view. All right, so with the budget process educational review done, I'm going to skip over item number 2, and state upcoming meetings, Village Board meeting Monday, March 9th, 2026 at 6 p.m. Then we have a series of proposed budget presentations and meetings that are Wednesday, March 18th, Monday, March 23rd, Wednesday, March 25th, and if needed, Monday, March 30th. And that Wednesday, March 25th will also include a public hearing for the budget. All of those meetings start at 6 p.m. They're all held in this room. And I just wanted to get those announcements out because we're going to move to executive session, I hope. And for anybody who's reviewing this online, we will not be coming back online after the executive session. We will exit and then adjourn the meeting. There will be no other business that's handled after the executive session. So with that, I'd like to ask for a motion by the village board to enter executive session for the purposes of collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of Civil Service Law.
So moved.
By trustee Woika. Second. By trustee Briggs. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That will carry, and we will move to executive session at 7:45 p.m. Thank you. For anybody